The photo was just a standard Polaroid, faded at the edges, pinned among dozens of others on the shelter wall of hope. But the billionaire froze, his breath catching. It was him, at age 7, wearing the same donated coat he'd never forgotten. And standing beside him in the frame, her arm around his small shoulders, was the very woman who now ran this place. The woman who, 30 years ago, had given him the only meal he'd had in 3 days. His name was Malcolm Vance, a titan of Silicon Valley, worth $4.3 billion, touring a modest homeless shelter in Detroit as part of a new philanthropic pledge. But in this single, staggering instant, the carefully crafted narrative of his life, the self-made origin story he'd sold for decades, shattered. Because the kindness that once saved him wasn't a random act. It was a thread, one that had been weaving through both their lives for 30 years, waiting for this moment to pull taut. To understand the fracture in Malcolm Vance's world, you have to understand the story he built. The official biography was pristine. A visionary who coded his first app in a college dorm, a ruthless innovator who built the data analytics giant Vance Predictive from a lone server to a $30 billion empire. Poverty was a vague, motivational footnote, humble beginnings, a blurry backdrop to his genius. But the 7-year-old in that Polaroid knew a different truth. That winter in Detroit was a concrete fact. 1993. His mother, Linda, was working 2 jobs and losing ground to a rent increase at the same auto parts factory where she'd been laid off 6 months prior. They lived in a single room at the Crestview Motel on Woodward Avenue, a place that charged by the week and smelled of mildew and despair. Malcolm's job at 7 was to be quiet and invisible, to not bother the manager, to collect discarded soda cans from the parking lot for the nickel deposits. The coat in the photo was not his. It was a woman's winter coat, donated, a dusty rose color with a fake fur collar, several sizes too large. He wore it because it was the warmest thing available. He remembers the specific, gut-twisting ache of hunger that had settled into a constant hum after 2 days without a proper meal. His mother had left for a promised cleaning shift at dawn, pressing her last $5 into his hand. "For dinner, baby. I'll be back late." He lost it somehow between the motel and the street. The panic of that loss, the cold fear of her disappointment, was more acute than the cold itself. He walked. He didn't know where he was going. He ended up outside a brick building with a faded sign that read Hope's Harbor Family Shelter. The smell of something cooking, tomato soup, maybe drifted from a vent. He didn't go to the door. He sat on the frozen curb across the street, wrapped in that pink coat, just watching the steam from the vent curl into the gray sky. He was calculating how many cans he'd need to find to replace the lost $5 when a shadow fell over him. A woman stood there holding a cardboard tray with 2 steaming foam cups. She was in her 40s then, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense posture. "You look like you could use some soup," she said. "Not are you hungry, not do you need help." A simple statement of fact. She handed him a cup and sat beside him on the curb. She didn't ask his name or where he lived. She just talked about the stubborn rose bush by the shelter door that kept trying to bloom despite the frost. That woman was Agatha Williams. She had been the director of Hope's Harbor for 8 years at that point. A former social worker, she had pioneered a simple, radical method: see the person, not just the problem. Her wall of hope wasn't for donors. It was for the people walking through her doors. A visual promise: your story does not end here. She documented every child who came through, with their permission, believing that visual proof of survival, of growth, was a powerful antidote to shame. Neuroscience now confirms what Agatha understood instinctively. Chronic childhood poverty can rewire a developing brain, impacting memory and planning. But consistent, caring intervention can forge alternate neural pathways. It can build resilience. Malcolm drank the soup. Agatha gave him a second cup to take to your mom, and a brown paper bag with a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. "Come back tomorrow if you need to," she'd said. "The door's open." He went back the next day, and the day after that. For 3 weeks, that shelter was his after-school program. Agatha let him help sort donated clothes. She gave him books. She asked him what he thought about things. For a few hours each day, He wasn't an invisible boy in a pink coat. He was Malcolm, who was good at puzzles and had questions about how heaters worked. Then his mother secured a stable apartment through a housing program. They moved across town. Life, in its chaotic way, moved on. The memory of Agatha and the shelter receded, softened into a general sense that things were hard once. The sharper edges, the hunger, the fear, the pink coat were filed away, compartmentalized. They became the humble beginnings his publicists would later reference, the fuel for his relentless drive. He never mentioned Agatha Williams by name in any interview. How could he? He didn't remember it. The specific neural pathways forged in trauma had, in a cruel twist, buried the specific agent of mercy. He built his empire on the myth of solitary grit. Meanwhile, Agatha Williams kept running Hope's Harbor. She kept taking pictures. She watched the cycles of poverty and policy crush some families and elevate others. She saw Malcolm Vance's name in a Forbes magazine article 15 years later. She stared at the photo of the confident young tech CEO. She looked at the 7-year-old boy's picture on her wall. She knew it was him, but she never made a call, never sent a letter. That wasn't the point. The point was that he'd made it. His picture was proof for the next scared child on the curb. This is where the two timelines, separate for 30 years, violently converge. Malcolm Vance, the billionaire, launched the Vance Foundation with great fanfare, a $100 million pledge to disrupt systemic poverty. His PR team arranged a tour of grassroots organizations for a photo shoot. Hope's Harbor was the third stop on the list, chosen by an algorithm for its high long-term stability outcomes. So Malcolm arrived in a bespoke camel hair overcoat, surrounded by assistants and cameras. He shook hands, made polite, practiced inquiries about operational challenges. He was shown the wall of hope, and his eyes, scanning the faces, landed on the one face he was never supposed to see again, his own. The camera smiles froze. The air left the room. All the meticulously crafted mythology of the self-made man evaporated in that single, silent stare. His mind, the billion-dollar supercomputer that modeled global markets, short-circuited. It wasn't just a photo. It was an artifact. It was evidence that his origin story was a lie by omission. He hadn't pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He'd been handed a bowl of soup and a sandwich by a woman who saw him. He turned slowly and found Agatha Williams watching him from the doorway to the kitchen. She held a ladle. She wasn't smiling for the cameras. She was just looking at him, with the same quiet, knowing assessment she'd given the boy on the curb 3 decades prior. She had aged, her hair gray, her frame a little softer, but her eyes were exactly the same. In that excruciating silence, a public relations nightmare and a profound personal reckoning hanging in the balance, Malcolm Vance did the one thing his crisis management team had not prepared for. He stepped away from the cameras, away from his handlers, and walked directly toward the woman with the ladle. His voice, when it finally came, was a broken thing, barely a whisper. "You fed me." The 3 words hung in the air, a confession that dismantled the entire performance. "You fed me." All the PR strategists, the assistants holding tablets, the photographer with his lens poised, they were now spectators to a private earthquake. Agatha Williams simply nodded once, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that carried the weight of 30 years. "Tomato soup," she said, "and a peanut butter sandwich." Malcolm Vance, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, felt the solid floor of his identity give way. The specific sensory memory flooded back, the salty warmth of the soup, the sticky sweetness of the peanut butter, the rough texture of the brown paper bag. It wasn't a vague kindness anymore. It was her, this woman, in this place. The neural pathways that had buried the trauma, as research shows they often do, had also buried the savior. Now both returned at once. His head of communications, Chloe, moved first, a professional instinct to control the narrative. She stepped forward with a calibrated smile. "Mr. Vance has always been deeply moved by the grassroots work of shelters like yours, Ms. Williams. It's why the foundation chose this visit." She was building a bridge back to the script, trying to frame his shock as empathetic overwhelm. Agatha's eyes didn't leave Malcolm's. She ignored Chloe completely. "You sat on the curb across the street for 45 minutes before I came out," she said, her voice even. "You were counting something in your head. I always wondered what." "Cans," Malcolm whispered, the word torn from him. "I was calculating how many cans I needed to find to replace $5 I'd lost." The admission, so specific and so pathetic, was more devastating than any corporate failure. It was the raw data point of his childhood that no algorithm could pretty up. This was the catastrophic pivot. The photo was one thing, a surprising coincidence. But this exchange was a direct pipeline to a past he had systematically erased. The billionaire and the shelter director were no longer in a present-day meeting. They were on a frozen Detroit curb in 1993, and everyone in the room could feel the shift. Chloe's smile tightened. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a more private." "No," Malcolm said. The command was quiet, but it silenced the room. He was still looking at Agatha. "I need a minute with Ms. Williams, alone, please." It was not a request. It was the voice of a CEO reclaiming control of a situation by surrendering it entirely. His team exchanged panicked glances but began ushering the media and other staff out of the modest common area. The cameras stopped rolling. The photo op was over. When the door clicked shut, the silence was profound. The only sound was the distant hum of a commercial dishwasher from the kitchen. Agatha set her ladle down on a nearby table. She didn't speak. She waited. She had spent a lifetime waiting for people to find the words they needed. "You knew," Malcolm finally said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a dawning realization. When my foundation called to schedule this, you knew it was me." "I did," Agatha replied. "I've known since I saw your picture in Forbes magazine in 2008. The boy in the pink coat grew a very sharp jawline, but the eyes were the same. And you didn't say anything, try to contact me." Agatha almost smiled. "For what? A donation? Recognition? That wasn't the point, Malcolm. The point was the soup. The point was that you weren't invisible that day. My knowing your name later didn't change what mattered." Her words reframed everything. For Malcolm, success was a monument built to be seen. For Agatha, success was a child who didn't go hungry, a story that didn't end on the curb. His photo on her wall wasn't a claim, it was a testament. It said to every new, terrified parent walking in, "See this man. He sat where you are sitting. Your child can survive this." She was using his billion-dollar brand without his permission or knowledge as a token of hope. The humility of it was staggering. "Why keep the picture?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because context is everything," she said, gesturing to the wall of hope. "Poverty strips people of their context, their history, their narrative. It tells you your story is just this one bad chapter. This wall gives the story back. It shows the asterisk before asterisk, so the after means something. Your picture," she said, looking directly at him, "is the most powerful after I have." Malcolm followed her gaze to the Polaroid. Seeing it now with her explanation was like seeing it for the first time. It wasn't an embarrassing secret. It was a source of her authority. A question formed in his mind, dangerous and urgent. "How many?" he asked. "How many what?" "How many of the children you helped? How many have an after like mine? How many got out?" Agatha's expression softened with a profound sadness. "Not enough," she said quietly. "Your story is the rare one, Malcolm, the exception. For every you, there are a dozen who cycle in and out of here for years. There are 100 who we never see again and can only hope are okay. The system isn't designed to create success stories. It's designed to provide temporary relief. We beat the odds here every single day, but the odds are house odds." This was the institutional stake. Malcolm's entire $100 million foundation pledge was predicated on the idea of scale, of disrupting systems. He'd spoken in boardrooms about leveraging data to identify high-impact interventions. Agatha was describing a reality no algorithm could capture, the slow, person-by-person, soup-by-sandwich work of change. His foundation wanted to build a new app for resource allocation. She was worried about the rising cost of peanut butter. He took a step closer to the wall, his eyes scanning the other photos. A teenage girl holding a diploma, a young man in military uniform, a mother with a newborn beaming in a clean apartment. Each was a monumental victory. Each was a statistical anomaly. The weight of his ignorance pressed down on him. He had been planning to fix poverty without understanding its true texture, its heartbreaking calculus. "Tell me," he said, turning back to her. "Tell me what you need, not for a press release. Right now, what would actually help?" Agatha studied him, and he felt like that 7-year-old boy again, being assessed for truthfulness. "The building," she said finally. "This building. We've rented it for 25 years. The new owners are selling. We have 6 months to find $2.8 million to buy it, or we close. That's what I need. That's what keeps the door open." $2.8 million. To Malcolm Vance, it was a rounding error, a line item on a quarterly report. To Hope's Harbor, it was an existential threat. The starkness of that disparity was a moral slap. Before he could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Chloe entered, her face a mask of professional concern. "Malcolm, we need to talk. The media outside have questions. The narrative is fragile." Her eyes darted to Agatha, clearly seeing her as the source of the fragility. Malcolm felt a familiar energy surge back, the energy of a high-stakes negotiation. But the stakes had been irrevocably changed. This wasn't about optics anymore. It was about a building, a curb, a bowl of soup. "Cancel the rest of the tour," he said to Chloe. "What?" "Malcolm, the schedule, the commitments." "Cancel it," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We're staying here, and draft an immediate press release. The Vance Foundation's inaugural project will be a capital campaign to secure permanent housing for Hope's Harbor and 5 other shelters facing the same threat. Lead with that." Chloe's eyes widened. This was a massive, unilateral pivot. It would scramble months of planning. "What's the angle?" she asked, her PR mind scrambling for the story. Malcolm looked at Agatha, then back at the photo of the boy in the pink coat. "The angle," he said slowly, "is that I was wrong. The angle is that disruption isn't about new systems. It's about preserving the doors that are already open. The angle is that sometimes you have to see your own picture on the wall to understand what you're really looking at." He had just committed his foundation, publicly and irrevocably, to a path born of personal crisis. He had no plan, no feasibility study, only a gut-deep need to make the after possible for more than just the rare exception. But as Chloe hurried out, already on her phone, a new fear gripped him. This wasn't just philanthropy now. It was restitution. And the world, including his board of directors, his shareholders, and the cynical tech press, would be watching to see if the billionaire's guilt trip was just another PR stunt. Agatha watched the whirlwind he had unleashed. "That was a big promise, Malcolm," she said. "Promises made in this room have weight. People here have had their lives broken by promises that weren't kept." "I know," he said. And for the first time, he felt the terrifying burden of hope, not as an abstract concept he funded, but as a specific, fragile thing he had just placed upon his own shoulders. He had traded the clean narrative of a charitable billionaire for the messy, high-stakes reality of a man trying to buy back a piece of his own soul. And he had no idea if his money, or his influence, was even the right currency for the debt he owed. The press release went out at 5 p.m. Eastern. By 6, the storm hit. Headlines were a mix of skepticism and awe. "Billionaire's epiphany or PR stunt." "Vance Foundation pivots after emotional shelter visit." But the real firestorm wasn't in the media. It was in a boardroom 3,000 miles away, where Malcolm's partners saw not a redemption story, but a catastrophic liability. An emergency board call for Vance Predictive was convened at 7. Malcolm took it in Agatha's cramped office, the smell of disinfectant and baked beans in the air. On the large screen, the faces of his 4 co-founders were rigid with controlled anger. "Malcolm, what in the actual hell is this?" demanded Richard Cho, the CFO. You unilaterally rebrand $100 million initiative based on a childhood memory. The markets are reacting. Our stock is down 2.3% on the uncertainty. It's not uncertainty, Malcolm said, his voice colder than he intended. It's clarity. We're funding real solutions. Real solutions are data-driven, said Susan Park, head of strategy. They're scalable. They're not buying individual buildings for sentimental reasons. You've made the foundation look impulsive. You've made *us look impulsive. This was the institutional countermove. Malcolm's world was built on cold, scalable logic. Agatha's world was built on specific, unsaleable kindness. He had tried to bring them together, and now his own empire was declaring war on the idea. They saw Agatha not as a savior, but as a risk vector. A charming, ladle-wielding variable that had corrupted their chief asset, Malcolm's predictable, ruthless focus. He ended the call with a terse, "The foundation is my mandate. The decision stands." But the line went dead with a finality that felt like a door slamming. Chloe handed him a tablet. "And this went viral 30 minutes ago." It was a side-by-side image. On the left, the polished Forbes portrait of Malcolm. On the right, the grainy, scanned Polaroid of the boy in the pink coat from Hope's Harbor's website. A viral tweet asked, "If he forgot her for 30 years, is his guilt money really charity?" The comment section was a brutal court of public opinion. Some called it a beautiful full circle. Many more called it a calculated, late-in-life reputation wash. The most cutting comment read, "He didn't remember the woman who fed him until he saw his own photo. That's not a heartwarming story. That's a diagnostic of a diseased soul." Agatha watched him read it, her expression unreadable. "I told you," she said softly. "Promises in this room have weight. Now you feel the other side of it, the weight of expectation and the ease with which people will call you a liar." Malcolm felt a surge of defensive fury, not at her but at the accusation. He had forgotten. That was the unforgivable truth. His mind, the asset he valued most, had failed to retain the single most important transaction of his life, not of money but of mercy. The neuroscience was clear. Childhood trauma could bury specific memories as a protective measure, but that was a clinical explanation. The internet dealt in moral verdicts. "I need to understand," he said, not to Agatha but to himself. "I need to understand what else I forgot." He turned to Chloe. "Get me everything. I want the shelter's annual reports, client outcome data, funding cycles, everything for the last 30 years. And I want to find my mother's records from back then. Any connection to this place." This was the second pivot, from public restitution to private excavation. If the world was going to judge his journey, he needed to map the territory himself, even the parts he'd paved over. The data was a shock. Hope's Harbor operated on a budgetary knife edge. 80% of its funding was unreliable, year-to-year grants and donations. Agatha's salary was $45,000 a year. She had no retirement plan. The Wall of Hope held pictures of over 400 children over 3 decades. Cross-referencing with publicly available data, graduation records, incarceration databases, social media, Malcolm's team could only verify positive long-term outcomes for 37 of them. 37. Agatha, not enough, was a devastating understatement. The system didn't just fail, it vanished people without a trace. Then he found his mother. Buried in digitized intake logs from 1993 was a simple entry. Linda Vance, 28, and son, 7, referred by DFCS, temporary lodging support, food assistance. Case closed, 4/12/94, stable housing secured. His mother had brought him here. It wasn't a chance encounter. She had swallowed her pride, walked through that door, and asked for help. And she had never, in all the years before her death, told him. She had let him believe the myth of solitary struggle, perhaps because she thought that's what he needed to be strong. The revelation hollowed him out. His mother's silence was a final, devastating gift. She had protected the memory of her own vulnerability to protect his narrative of strength. And in doing so, She had erased Agatha Williams from his story. He spent the next week at the shelter, not as a billionaire but as a volunteer. He peeled potatoes. He sorted socks. He sat in on intake interviews. He saw the weary, precise machinery of Agatha's compassion. He saw her remember every child's name, every parent's anxiety. He saw her navigate the Byzantine bureaucracy of housing vouchers and food stamps with the patience of a master chess player. This was the system, not a sleek algorithm, but a labyrinth of paperwork and fragile human connections. And he saw the shadow system, too. The local landlord who tried to hike the rent on a family Agatha had just housed, knowing the voucher would cover it. The grocery store that suddenly ran out of the discount staple items when a shelter voucher was presented. The quiet, relentless friction that grinds hope into dust. One afternoon, a crisis made it all terrifyingly concrete. A young mother, Jasmine, who had just secured an apartment through the shelter's program, came running back in, her two toddlers in tow, hysterical. The apartment had failed a sudden city inspection for a minor code violation the landlord refused to fix. She was effectively homeless again, her voucher now in limbo. The system, in its infinite capriciousness, had taken back its gift. Agatha moved with calm urgency, making calls, her voice a steady instrument of advocacy. Malcolm watched, feeling his billions turn to vapor in the face of a broken faucet and a negligent landlord. He could buy the building, but he couldn't fix this hidden latticework of daily injustices. The scale of the problem was atomized, infinite. Frustrated, he intervened. He had Chloe find the landlord and call him. Minutes later, the man called Agatha, obsequious and apologetic. The fix would be made by tomorrow. Problem solved. Malcolm felt a flicker of the old power, the ability to bend the world with a phone call. But when he looked at Agatha, her expression was not gratitude, it was disappointment. "What?" he asked, baffled. "You just reinforced his worst behavior," she said quietly. "He now knows that if he neglects his properties, a billionaire might call and make it worth his while. What about the next family, Malcolm? The one without a billionaire in the waiting room? You solved Jasmine's problem. You made the system worse." It was the "wait, it gets worse" moment. His money, his power, wasn't just ineffective, it was actively toxic. It distorted the very ecosystem he was trying to heal. He was trying to plant a forest with a bulldozer. That night, defeated, he scrolled through the endless, cynical commentary online. Then, a direct message caught his eye. It was from a man named David. The message read, "I was at Hope's Harbor in '96. Agatha saved my life too, but you want to know what your foundation really does? Look at the eviction data in the buildings your venture capital arm invested in last year." A cold dread seeped into Malcolm's stomach. He ordered a report. The analysis came back in the morning. Vance Predictive's venture fund, which he chaired but rarely reviewed, had a significant stake in a property tech startup. That startup's algorithm, designed to maximize portfolio yield, had been used by property managers to identify, attrisk, tenants and institute aggressive rent hikes or non-renewals in rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods. One of those neighborhoods was just 8 blocks from Hope's Harbor. The algorithm had likely contributed to the very housing instability that was filling Agatha's beds. The revelation was monstrous. He wasn't just failing to help. Part of his empire, operating on autopilot, was actively manufacturing the misery Agatha spent her life cleaning up. The left hand was evicting families, while the right hand posed for photos in the shelter that took them in. His guilt was not just personal, it was institutional, systemic, and horrifically profitable. He drove to Agatha's small house that night, the report burning a hole in his briefcase. He found her in her garden, pulling weeds in the twilight. He didn't speak. He just handed her the document. She read it slowly, her hands growing still. When she looked up, her eyes held a profound, weary sadness. "So this is the machine," she said, not with anger but with a grim understanding. "This is what I've been fighting all these years, and you own part of it." "I didn't know," he said, the words utterly inadequate. "That's the problem, Malcolm," she replied. "You built a world so big you can't see all the corners. The money moves in the dark, and in the light you hand out soup, but the money in the dark always wins." This was the nadir, the full horrific circle. He had come to repay a debt, only to discover he was the one holding the note, charging interest. The photo on the wall wasn't just a symbol of past salvation. It was a damning receipt for a lifetime of willful blindness. He had two choices: walk away from the machine he built and likely be destroyed by it, or try to dismantle it from the inside with no guarantee of success and every certainty of brutal retaliation. Standing there in her garden, the scent of damp earth around them, Malcolm Vance made his decision. He wasn't here to write a check. He was here to wage a war, not against poverty, but against the part of himself and the system he embodied that created it. The path to redemption wasn't through philanthropy. It was through demolition, and he would have to use the very tools of the empire to tear it down. The war began not with a press conference, but with a quiet, internal memo. Malcolm Vance directed the Vance Predictive Venture Fund to immediately divest from the property tech startup and initiate an audit of every investment in its portfolio for adverse social impact. The board called it financial suicide. Malcolm called it a down payment. He knew he couldn't win a public vote with his board, so he didn't call one. He used his controlling shares to force the divestment, a move that triggered a cascade of legal challenges and a 15% single-day drop in the company's stock. The financial press declared it Vance's vanity purge. But in the shelter on Glendale Avenue, a different story was unfolding. With the $2.8 million from his foundation transferred without restriction, Agatha Williams bought the building. Hope's Harbor was now permanently, irrevocably home. The first battle was won. But Malcolm knew it was a skirmish. The real war was against the pattern. He couldn't buy every building. He had to break the algorithm. So he did the one thing his tech empire was built to do: he repurposed the weapon. He assembled a small, secret team within Vance Predictive. Their mission: use the company's vast data crunching power not to maximize profit, but to identify and expose predatory practices in housing. They built a mirror algorithm. Instead of flagging at-risk tenants for eviction, it flagged at-risk landlords for inspection. It cross-referenced code violation histories, eviction filing patterns, and rent hike data against corporate ownership structures. Then, they anonymously fed the data to city housing agencies and tenant rights organizations. The first major exposure was a revelation. A single, shell company-owned LLC was behind 40% of the aggressive eviction filings in the neighborhoods surrounding 3 different shelters, including Hope's Harbor. The media, tipped off with the data, named it. Public outrage forced City Hall to act. The algorithm of extraction began to glitch. Meanwhile, Malcolm personally faced the board's wrath. They moved to strip him of his executive chairmanship, citing gross mismanagement of assets. The showdown was set for a shareholder meeting in December. He was prepared to lose. He had already transferred a significant portion of his personal wealth into a trust designed to fund operations like Agatha's in perpetuity. He was unbundling himself from the machine. But then an unexpected ally emerged. David, the man who had sent the damning direct message, came forward publicly. He wasn't just a former shelter resident. He was a senior data engineer at a rival tech firm. And he had brought friends. A coalition of tech workers, sick of building tools that exacerbated inequality, began leaking internal data and building counter-algorithms of their own. Malcolm's stand had become a flashpoint for a silent, growing rebellion within Silicon Valley itself. The war was no longer his alone. The night before the shareholder vote, Malcolm went to Hope's Harbor. It was late. Agatha was in her office reviewing a food delivery invoice. He didn't speak. He just placed a single sheet of paper on her desk. It was the trust document nomming her as one of 3 stewards. Her eyes scanned the page, then rose to meet his. "This is too much," she said. "It's not enough," he replied. "It can't ever be enough, but it's a start. And it's not from the foundation, it's from me. from the boy who drank your soup. Agatha was quiet for a long time. Then she opened a locked drawer in her desk. She pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger. It was a handwritten log going back to the shelter's first day in 1985. "This is the other wall," she said. "The one nobody sees, every name, every story, every can of soup, every bandage, every night of safe sleep." She turned to an entry from November 12, 1993. In careful script it read, "Malcolm 7, quiet, smart, counts everything. Gave extra sandwich for his mother, Linda. He'll make it." Malcolm's breath caught. Here was the proof, not of his success, but of her faith. She had bet a peanut butter sandwich on him 30 years ago, and she had recorded it not for him but as a note to herself. A record of hope extended. "I kept track because someone has to," she said. "The system doesn't count the people it loses, so I count them." The next day at the shareholder meeting, Malcolm didn't defend his business decisions. He told a story. He told them about the pink coat, the curb, the soup, the ledger. He told them about the 37 verified successes out of 400 and the crushing weight of the anonymous 363. He told them about the mirror algorithm and the hidden patterns of profit built on despair. He didn't ask for their votes. He asked them to look at their own ledgers. He lost the chairmanship, but he won something else. In the weeks that followed, 3 major institutional investors announced new social impact mandates for their tech portfolios. The pressure shifted. Vance Predictive, under new leadership, quietly absorbed Malcolm's mirror algorithm team and made their work a new, public-facing division. The weapon was being retrofitted in real time. A year later, on a crisp autumn day, the expanded Hope's Harbor reopened. The building next door had been purchased and renovated, adding 20 family units of transitional housing and a community tech center where residents could access the very tools, legal databases, housing market analyzers, financial literacy apps that were once used against them. On the newly painted Wall of Hope, the Polaroid of the boy in the pink coat still held its place. But now beside it was a second photo. Malcolm Vance in a simple sweater washing dishes in the shelter's kitchen, caught mid-laugh with Agatha. The caption read, "Then and now, the circle never ends." At the reopening ceremony, Agatha handed Malcolm a small, wrapped box. Inside was a can of tomato soup and a jar of peanut butter. "For your office," she said, "a reminder of what actually scales." He now splits his time, half in Silicon Valley, working to steer the beast he built toward less destructive ends, half in Detroit, working from a small desk at the shelter, using his connections to broker partnerships between tech and social services. He is no longer a billionaire on a philanthropic tour. He is a conduit, a translator between two worlds that speak different languages. The final, surprising detail emerged from the ledger. As Malcolm helped Agatha digitize the thousands of entries, a pattern emerged that she had never noticed. Over the decades, 7 other individuals who had passed through Hope's Harbor as children had later become donors, sending modest checks or volunteering. Their names were in the ledger twice, first as recipients of help, then as givers of it. The circle Agatha had nurtured was wider and more resilient than even she knew. The kindness had not been a single thread, but a seed that spawned a hidden, resilient network. Malcolm was not the only after. He was just the most visible. On a quiet Tuesday, Malcolm sat with a 9-year-old boy named Eli in the shelter's new homework room. The boy was struggling with a math problem. Malcolm helped him work it through. As Eli packed up, he looked at Malcolm and said, "My mom says you're rich because you're smart." Malcolm thought of the curb, the lost $5, the counting of cans. He thought of the neural pathways forged in scarcity and the ones rewired by a bowl of soup. "I'm here," he said to Eli, "because a lot of people were kind, and because I remember what it's like to be stuck on a problem. The being smart part came later." Eli considered this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. He shouldered his backpack. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Vance." "Yes," Malcolm said, "I'll be here." The door is open. The circle remains unbroken. And sometimes the most disruptive technology in the world is not an algorithm, but a persistent, patient human memory. So, what is the true currency of change? This story was never really about a billionaire writing a check. It was about a man who had to forget who he was in order to become successful, and who had to remember who he was in order to become whole. It reveals a powerful, often invisible architecture. We build systems for scale and efficiency, but human lives are saved at the granular level, one bowl of soup, one remembered name, one open door at a time. Malcolm Vance's journey shows us that the most profound disruption isn't technological, it's moral. It's the willingness to audit not just your portfolio, but your own memory. To confront the uncomfortable truth that our personal success might be built upon a foundation of collective forgetting. Agatha Williams's ledger holds the deeper lesson. She understood what data often misses, that hope is not a metric. It is a patient, persistent act of witnessing. Her wall of hope and her hidden logbook were tools of resistance against a world eager to anonymize struggle. By remembering Malcolm, she preserved a narrative that he himself had discarded. And in doing so, she gave him back the very context he needed to become truly generous. Science now confirms what stories like this have always known. Studies in gratitude show that acts of kindness and thankfulness create durable psychological benefits, strengthening the bonds that allow communities to endure. They are social emotions with deep evolutionary roots, emanating from the fundamental truth that we survive by helping and being helped. Malcolm and Agatha's story is a macro-scale example of that ancient, essential circuit being completed. This is the lingering question their story leaves with us. What have you chosen to forget in your own climb? And who in your past held a space for you when you had nowhere else to go? We all have curbs. We all have pink coats. We all have someone who offered soup, whether we took it or not. The power lies not in the grandeur of our repayment, but in the quality of our remembrance. In our decision to look, truly look, at the people our systems are designed to overlook. The circle never ends because every ending contains a new beginning. Every after photo on a wall is a before for another chapter. The most sustainable solution to any crisis is not a new algorithm, but an old, unwavering commitment to see someone who needs something and to do it. If this story reshaped your perspective for even a moment, then its purpose is fulfilled. But the conversation doesn't have to end here. Subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the human heart, where small choices lead to monumental change. Tap like if you believe in the power of memory, and share this with someone who reminds you of what really matters. We would love to hear your story in the comments. Have you ever been Agatha to someone or Malcolm, searching for a piece of your own past? Your experience is part of this same unbroken circle. Thank you for listening, for remembering, and for being part of a community that values depth over noise. May you always have the courage to look at your own picture on the wall, and may you always find the wisdom to understand what you're really seeing. Until next time,